Good morning again. Special, if you weren't in here at the very beginning, happy Father's Day to all the fathers, and not just fathers maybe in the natural sense, but for some of you guys maybe that haven't had children, but you've been mentors and spiritual fathers or leaders in other areas. I think that's an equally important, or certainly a very important role you fill. So when I talk today, I want to talk about some famous men, but I hope that women, you won't necessarily think this doesn't apply to you, because I'm talking about courage, and there's certainly, for every courageous man we know in history, there is at least as many courageous women. And so I want to challenge all of us. I'm going to talk about a group of guys. They're some of my favorite guys in the whole Bible. They're called David's mighty men. But if you're a lady with us, understand that the principles I'm talking about have to do with being courageous and taking a stand. And I think they fit all of us. And the Bible's full of heroic deeds. One of the things I really like about it is it's not just a rule book, it's a storybook. And in many ways, particularly the Old Testament, would be Israel's history book, same as we took American history in school if you grew up here. To the nation of Israel, the Old Testament is their history book. And it tells, actually they have a much longer history than we do, so it tells great highs that they experienced and great lows, and it's got some things they probably wish had never happened, some things that are kind of embarrassing. It's also got some things that are magnificent, and stories of teenagers killing giants, and stories of 300 men fighting 185,000 men, and these epic deeds. But in 2 Samuel 23, I'm going to start in verse 8. And I'm going to read you, it's kind of a little long passage, but it names the exploits or the deeds of David's mighty men. And David had an army of over 1 million people, but there was this small handful of people that we end up knowing their names, and they set themselves apart by their acts of courage. So I'm going to read this to you if you have your Bible or your device. It's in 2 Samuel 23, starting in verse 8. These are the names of David's warriors, and some of these names are kind of funky, so bear with me if I say them a little bit wrong. Josheb-Basshebeth the Tahkemonite, it starts you right off right, was chief of the officers. He wielded his spear against 800 men that he killed at one time. After him, Eleazar the son of Dodo, son of an Ahohite, was among the 3 warriors with David when they defied the Philistines. The men of Israel retreated in the place they had gathered for battle, but Eleazar stood his ground and attacked the Philistines until his hand was tired and stuck to his sword. The Lord brought about a great victory that day. Then the troops came back to him, but only to plunder the dead. After him was Shammah, the son of Agi. The Philistines had assembled in formation where there was a field full of lentils. The troops fled from the Philistines, but Shammah took his stand in the middle of the field, defended it, and struck down the Philistines. So the Lord brought about a great victory. Notice this recurring theme. Everyone around them falls back and leaves one man standing, but they stand. And then it follows it by saying, the Lord brought about a great victory because of it. 3 of the 30 leading warriors went down at harvest time and came to David at the cave of Adullam while a company of Philistines was camping in the valley. At that time, David was in the stronghold, and a Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. David was extremely thirsty and said, if only someone would bring me water to drink from the well at the city gate of Bethlehem. So 3 of his warriors broke through the Philistine camp and drew water from the well at the gate of Bethlehem. They brought it back to David, but he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out to the Lord and said, Lord, I would never do such a thing. Is this not the blood of men who risked their lives? So he refused to drink it. Such were the exploits of the 3 warriors. And then he names a couple more. I want to just read a little bit longer. Abishai, Joab's brother and son of Zeruiah, was the leader of the 3. He raised his spear against 300 men and killed them, gaining a reputation among the 3. Was he not more honored than the 3? He became their commander, even though he did not become one of the 3. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was the son of a brave man from Kabzeel, a man of many exploits. Benaiah killed 2 sons of Ariel of Moab, and he went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. He also killed an Egyptian, a huge man. Even though the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, Benaiah went down to him with a club, snatched the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and then killed him with his own spear. These were the exploits of Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, who had a reputation among the 3 warriors. He was the most honored of the 30, but he did not become one of the 3. David put him in charge of his bodyguard. Now, As I said, there were over 1 million people in the army, but we don't know anybody else's name much. He goes on to list the 30, and the 30 were these other warriors that had dignified themselves or set themselves apart by their heroic actions. Other than that, there's a bunch of nameless soldiers who obviously fought many battles, and in David's time, they were at war almost his entire rule. But I wonder this, because in each of these cases, we find one man who went against the flow, who when everybody else said, it's too dangerous, the cost is too great, one man that stood there and said, not on my watch. One man that stood in that position and said, I'm not giving it up. And throughout history, men like Audie Murphy, men like Sergeant York, these men in different wars have done this, where everyone's falling back around them. They have stood their ground. I wonder this, though. I wonder for you or me, what is there in our life, what principle, what person that we would stand in the face of almost certain death, or at least against overwhelming odds? What person or what principle in our life would we be willing to make a stand? Would we, as one of these mighty men, make a stand? It wasn't always this way for Israel. You know, I said the Old Testament is kind of their history book. A few books later, the prophet Ezekiel writes these words that the Lord spoke to him. It's in Ezekiel 22, verse 30. I searched for a man among them who would repair the wall and stand in the gap before me on behalf of the land so that I might not destroy it, but I found no one. So I have poured out my indignation on them and consumed them with the fire of my fury. I've brought their actions down on their own heads. Ezekiel wrote these words not from Israel, but from Babylon, where he was an exile. There was only a few of them that lived, and they exported them to Babylon and to other parts of the world, and emptied both Israel and Judah, the southern kingdom. And in a time when they needed a mighty man, in a time when they needed a Shammah or they needed an Eliezer, God said, I looked and I found no one. And in our lives, for the sake of our families or the people around us, we sure don't want God to say, I searched for a man that would stand and I found no one. So what, speaking about that, what would you give that kind of commitment to? And I want you to take a second and think about that. What is there that I would stand? And here's how I'd like you maybe to do it. Here's the questions to ask yourself. Who or what would I stand for no matter what it cost? In other words, if the doctor's report came in, my question would never be, how much is that going to cost? That just wouldn't matter. Who would I give everything I have for? Who or what would I stand for no matter how long it took? It's been a year. It's been 3 years. I give up. Who is there you just absolutely would never, no matter how long it took, give up on? Or what is there that you go, no matter how hard I have been pedaling uphill, no matter how hard I've been sailing against the wind, there is never a time I'm going to say enough. Who or what is there that you would defend no matter how high the risk was to you personally? If it could cost you your life, your reputation, your job. Who or what is there that you would say it doesn't matter? I mean, that wouldn't even be a thought. It's just no matter what the cost, no matter how long it took, no matter how high the risk, and last one, no matter how long the odds. In other words, for a person you don't care a lot about, if you saw him in the street in traffic, you might calculate the odds of, there's a pretty good chance we're both going to get hit if I go save them. But you wouldn't do that for your kid, would you? It might be a 99.9% chance both of you are going to get hit, but you've got to try. Who or what is there in your life that you would run into a burning building for when everybody's running out? That's the question I'm asking today, because that's what mighty men do. Mighty men don't just decide they want to be mighty. They just say, this is not negotiable. This is where I stand. In fact, history records the story of Martin Luther, who actually led the I guess what became the Lutheran Church, but really what it was a challenge. He nailed the theses to the wall, the challenge against the Catholic Church. And the challenge was for the common person to have a Bible they could read, for the common person not to have the religious machine dictate their life, but for people to be able to actually have a relationship themselves with the Lord. And on his trial, he basically said, "Here I stand, I can do no other." And what is there in your life that you say, wouldn't matter how much it cost, how long it took, how bad the odds were, and how dangerous it was, I couldn't back away from that? And I want to suggest to you today 5 things to consider making non-negotiable, making them places that you say, "Here I stand, I can do no other." And I want to give you an example in each of them from the life of the mightiest man that ever lived, Jesus. Because these were 5 decisions that he made that he said, no matter what, these are non-negotiable. This is who I am. This is what I came to do. And so I want to suggest 5 things to you today. The first one is your faith. Now, according to One News Now, a Christian is martyred somewhere in the world every 5 minutes. I mean, since we've been in service, there's already been about 10 Christians killed nearly, somewhere in the world. In fact, in the last 100 years, there's been more Christians martyred than in the entire history of Christianity before that. We don't see it. It's not next door for us, but it's real and it's out there. And you may never be asked. I pray that none of us are ever asked to make that decision, but there are other ways of making a stand. Whether it's life or death, there are other things that we can be asked to make a stand on. In other words, do we live all out for our faith? Do we say this is the line and I'm not going behind it for our faith? Jesus said this is what it looks like to live all out for your faith. In Matthew 16:24, Jesus said to his disciples, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it." And then he asked a question I think is the perfect question for us to ask on this topic of, is this a non-negotiable? Is this a place to make a stand? He says, what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? So our faith is a place I believe we should set our minds to take a stand. There are certain things in my life. Now there's a saying out there, and I like this saying, and in fact I use it quite a bit, of that's not a hill to die on. And what that means basically is when you're young and hard-headed like me, you thought you had to win every confrontation and every discussion. And just 2 weeks ago, I finally got over that. No. But you learn over time that some stuff's not worth what it costs to win. But what I'm talking about today, these 5 principles are the ones that are hills to die on. These are places you dig in your heels. And you know what? You read about David's mighty men. One of them was in a field full of peas. But they must have been his peas. Because I like peas okay, but not enough to fight 800 people over them. If there's peas on the table and you want to fight, you can have them. This man took a stand, and in fact, Eliezer, it says, took a stand in a field of barley. I don't know if that was even his barley, but the point was, as Popeye said, enough's is enough's, and I can't take no more. And so the first place is your faith. The second place, your family. And again, Jesus shows us this. Jesus, in his most painful moment, in his most difficult moment, when everything in the world seemingly and beyond the realm of what we see was against him, hanging there in ultimate pain and on his way to the most painful death that Rome could imagine. So painful that a Roman citizen couldn't even be crucified. They had to be more merciful in the way they killed him. In the middle of that, he looks down from the cross, and in John 19, standing by the foot of Jesus were his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple he loved standing there, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his home. In other words, in Jesus' most difficult hour, in his most painful hour, when everybody's against him, he still says, my family's got to be cared for. I mean, he was literally moments from his last breath, and yet his focus is not on him. His focus is on his mother, is on his family. So your faith, your family. Let me give you a third one. This one might surprise you a little bit, but I think it's another place to dig your heels in and say, I'm going to stand here. Your friends. And not everybody you know is your friend. I grew up with a swimming pool, so I learned what it was like to have summer friends. And some are not your friends in the winter, by the way. But in the summer, you had more friends. But I'm talking about true friends. I'm talking about the ones that stand with you. I'm talking about the ones that when you tell them you're in trouble, they don't ask, do you deserve it? Even if you do deserve it, that's irrelevant to them. Jesus said this in John 15. This is my command, love one another as I have loved you. Now, how did he love these guys? He's talking to them in the upper room hours before he's on a cross. He's just washed their feet, which I got to say is certainly not what you would imagine the creator of the universe doing. But he's hours away from giving his life, not for himself, but for these friends. He says, love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, that someone would lay down his life for his friends. And we see it just a few hours later because Jesus is arrested in Gethsemane, and the book of John tells us that the disciples are around him. And as the soldiers come up, he says, who are you looking for? And they say, Jesus of Nazareth. And he says, I am he. And then he says an interesting thing. If you're looking for me, why don't you let all these guys go? That's a selfless act. I got to tell you, I'd want all those guys around me I could get. If I'm going to go get put in jail, at least I want some company. Jesus puts himself between these soldiers. In fact, one of his guys has already pulled a sword out and declared war. And it probably wouldn't have been a very long fight. And yet Jesus puts himself between his friends and this danger. And I don't know who in your life is a true friend, but I got to tell you, that may be a hill to die on for you. That may be a place to make a stand. That may be a place to say, the Bible tells me not just to love God with all my heart, but to love my neighbor as myself. As myself's a tough, because I got to tell you, I love some me. To quote the famous philosopher Terrell Owens, I love me some me. Which means to love someone as myself means I would do anything to save that person. I would do anything to keep that person from being found out. I would do anything to protect that person's reputation, life, their productivity, their anything. I would do anything to protect their feelings, and that's what Jesus said. Lay down your life for your friends. So that's the third place. Let me suggest a fourth one. Your freedom. Now, some of you guys are veterans. Some of you ladies and guys are veterans. And even, in fact, some of you guys are still active duty. So you know what this means on a national level. You know what it means to make a commitment that I will stand for my nation's freedom halfway around the world simply because my commander-in-chief says that. You know what it means to give your life for freedom, whether you've had to actually do that yet, or whether you've just put yourselves in the position to do it, or whether maybe you're a veteran that didn't even see that moment, but you had to make the commitment that you would go that far. What about the rest of us? Well, there's more than one kind of freedom. And I want to challenge you on this one a little bit. I want to spend a little longer on this one because here's what I believe. There's an awful lot of men that are mighty men inside a shell that are needing to break out, and they're held captive by something. And for many of you guys or ladies, it's an addiction. Let me give you some statistics that may surprise you. Between 64 and 68% of young adult men and 18% of women view porn at least once every week. The American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers reports that 56% of divorce cases involve one party having an obsessive interest in pornographic websites. Over half the marriages that failed because a man or a woman couldn't break free from the addiction of pornography. It's not the only addiction out there, is it? How about alcohol? 24.7% of people ages 18 or older reported that they engaged in binge drinking in the last month. It's 1 out of 4 people, not had a drink, engaged in binge drinking. And 6.8% of adults had an alcohol use disorder in 2014. I'll give you just a couple more statistics because drugs, and these are just illegal drugs, this doesn't even touch the prescription drug epidemic that we're dealing with, but 9.4% of Americans aged 12 and older have used an illicit drug in the past month. Age 12. Fathers, you're not just standing for yourself and freedom, you're standing for your children. 22.6% of people aged 18 to 20 reported using an illicit drug in the past month. Almost a fourth of 18 to 20-year-olds. You're 12-year-old, you're a teenager. You've got a hill to stand on and maybe to die on for yourself, first of all, because they're watching you. And if you're addicted, if you're in prison to something, they see that. You know kids see stuff. All you got to do is let one of them ride in the back of the car and not say anything for a minute, and they'll rattle something out you said that you wish you hadn't said right after they say it. Jesus came for freedom. Here's what he said in John 8, verse 31. Jesus said to the Jews who believed him, "If you continue in my word and you really are my disciples, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." He didn't say that to unbelievers. I've talked about that once before. We think the truth will win sinners. Truth doesn't win sinners. Not alone. They've heard enough truth. We got 1,500 churches in Chattanooga. If telling the truth would do it, everybody would be saved by now. He says to the Jews who believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free." "We are descendants of Abraham," they answered. "We've never been enslaved to anyone. How can you?" In other words, we're not at war. Now, these are people talking, mind you, that have been conquered by Rome, and they don't even have a nation at this point. They may be descendants of Abraham. They're Roman, not citizens. They're Roman slaves, for lack of a better word. They can't even see that. They say, "We're descendants of Abraham. We've never been enslaved to anyone. How can you say you'll become free?" And Jesus said, "I assure you," listen to this, because this pretty much throws a blanket over all of us. "Everyone who commits sin is a slave of sin. A slave does not remain in the household forever, but a son does remain forever. Therefore, if the Son sets you free, you really will be free." I don't know what it is in your life. It might be anger management issues. It might be substance abuse. It might be pornography. It might be something entirely different. It might be, it could be any number of things. But the point is, freedom comes only when you stand and say, "This is as far as it goes." When like Shammah, when like Eliezer, when like Benaiah, you stand and go, if everybody else falls back, this stops here. It comes when you say, "I'm going to be a mighty man. I'm going to be a mighty woman. I'm going to stand. My freedom, my family's freedom." Because let me tell you, this stuff travels in families. We all know that. I don't have exact statistics, but you've heard them. Alcoholism travels in families. Suicide. I've got a friend who's had 5 in his immediate family. You can't tell me that these things don't attach themselves to family. And somebody somewhere, just like with Ezekiel, where God said, "I looked for someone to repair the wall and stand in the gap, and I found no one." God's looking at your family right now going, will someone be the one that says, "You know what? This gap's been in the wall long enough. Here I stand. I can do no other." There's one more. Your future. You know, God has a plan for each of our lives. The problem for many of us is it's more important to God that we achieve it than it is to us. David said in Psalm 139, all my days were written in your book before I was even born. In other words, God knows where I'm going to be next week, next month, or at least He certainly also has a plan for where He wants me to be. And in Jeremiah, He says, the plans I have for you aren't to harm you, but to prosper you, to do good to you. The Bible is full of promises about what it means when we follow God's plan. All things work together for the good of those who love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. The point is, we've got to make a stand to go, I will absolutely keep God's commandments. I will absolutely stand. I will absolutely follow Him with all my heart, all my mind, all my soul, all my strength. Because that is the key to my future. And guess what? There's somebody else that has a plan for your life. Jesus explains it in John 10:10. A thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I've come so that they may have life and have it in abundance. If you're living anything less than an abundant life, and I don't mean if you never have a headache, I understand abundant lives still face problems. But if you're living a life and you're saying this to yourself a lot, there must be more. Guess what? There is. Ecclesiastes 3 says God has placed eternity in the human heart. There's more. The whole name of our church is about true life, because I believe there are a lot of Christians that live their entire life without experiencing 1 second of true life. The life Jesus came and said, I came, you have abundant, true, fulfilled life. So, fight for your faith, fight for your family, fight for your friends, your freedom, and fight for your future. And you might be thinking this, you might be thinking, I'm not sure. What does it take to make a mighty man? Because I'm not sure I qualify. Those guys were obviously, they're killing 300 and 800 by themselves, and they're taking spears away from giants with just a club, and they're fighting lions. I hadn't really signed up for that either. Those guys must have just been born, rough riders. They must have been bad to the bone. I'd like to have seen those guys. I bet they had muscles on top of their muscles. Let me read you their resume. Because here's what I want to do before we close. I want to decide if you could qualify to be a mighty man. Because maybe that's just over our head, right? Maybe that's just a little too much to say, I'm going to be a mighty man, I'm going to stand, I'm going to make a difference, I'm going to be one of those men that they would have written about when they were writing. I'm not going to be that million people that you never heard of, because when they all fall back, I'm going to stand. Maybe you don't have that in you. Maybe I don't have that in me. Let me read you their resume. It's in 1 Samuel 22, verse 1. So David left Gath and took refuge in the cave of Adullam. When David's brothers and his father's whole family heard, they went down there and joined him. Now here come the mighty men. In addition, every man who was desperate, in debt, or discontented rallied around him, and he became their leader. About 400 men were with him. So I won't ask for a show of hands, but you can do it if you want to. Who's desperate? Who's in debt? What was the other one? It's another D. Discontented. Do you fill any of those? Because that's the job required. Can you check any of those 3 boxes? Because if so, you got the makeup of a mighty man or a mighty woman. And on any given day, I'm at least 1 or 2 of those. I'm always the middle one, in debt. But sometimes I get all 3 boxes in one day. Desperate, discontented, in debt, I get all those. My point being, there is a path to being a mighty man or a mighty woman of God. And it isn't all about you were just born that way. In fact, I think God had this great pleasure in picking the exact person you would have not picked. When He picked Gideon, He had to go find him hiding from the enemy, from the Midianites. He had to go find him, and he says, "Hail, mighty warrior." And Gideon went, "What you talking about, Willis?" He looked around like, he said, "I'm the smallest guy in my family, and my family's the smallest family in Benjamin, and that's the smallest tribe, by the way, in case you didn't know about these tribes." And so, you just pick the runt, the one the mom pushed away, I'm not going to waste any time nurturing that one. God says, bingo, but you know what? You got too many people. Let's get rid of all of them but 300 too. David's dad thought so little of him that he didn't even invite him to the king anointing party at his house. Samuel said, one of your sons is going to be king. And he brought all his sons in but David. I think God gets this wonderful pleasure out of Samuel looking at the first brother, Eliab, and this must be the one. And God went, no. Well, what about this one? No. 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 Imagine Samuel when he got to the end of the line and went, well, you want me to go? I'd almost bet you went down the line a couple of times. Hold on, God. Maybe you were not looking when I passed Shammah or whoever. You know, and he finally just like, you got any other sons? Like you forgot about? God does that throughout. Jesus comes to the earth. He could have ridden into Jerusalem. At 12, he was dazzling the teachers of the law. He could have picked 12 of them for disciples. He went and got fishermen, businessmen. He got one guy that was a political activist. He got another guy that was a thief. I mean, Jesus went and picked all the things that in people that we wouldn't have. So that gives me some hope, because I can check a lot of the boxes of the people he picked. And you can too. And yet, those are the exact men that these exploits tell. And I want to give you, just in closing, I want to give you 3 characteristics of mighty men, or 3 ways to become a mighty man or woman of God. 3 ways to become this person that can stand in the face of long odds, impossible situation, long periods of time, fear itself, because we all feel it. And I'm going to show you 3 characteristics. First of all is commitment to a cause. 1 Chronicles 11 tells the same story about these mighty men pretty much that 2 Samuel does. It says, the following were the chiefs of David's warriors who together with all Israel, here's their cause, strongly supported him in his reign to make him king. They came to him when he wasn't king. They didn't come after he was king and it was the popular thing to do. They came to him when he was running for his life from the king. And they were committed to the cause of making him king. And Jesus, the mightiest man of all, absolutely came and stood in place because he was committed to a cause. In fact, when he's standing in front of Pilate on trial for his life, and all he has to do is just back off a little bit. In John 18:37, he says, I was born for this, and I've come into the world for this, to testify to the truth. Everyone who's of the truth listens to my voice. So you want to become a mighty man? Become committed to a cause. Whatever that is. If it's one of those 5 F words that I put up there, if it's your faith, if it's your family, if it's your freedom, become committed to a cause. Say, this must be done. As individuals, we need to do that. As a church, there needs to be a cause that we say, you know what? This has to happen. And it has to happen here with us. And it has to happen now. That's being committed to a cause. That's where you stop counting cost, you stop counting time, and you simply say, this has to be done. The second thing is they were committed to a mentor. Now, what in the world changed men who were desperate, in debt, and discontented into mighty men of valor? People that killed giants and took spears away from people a head taller than them and fought lions and things like that. Exposure on an everyday basis to a giant killer. Before any of these men knew him, teenage David killed a bear, killed a lion, and then killed a giant. And these broke, grumbling, discontented, discouraged guys were exposed day after day to a man that was everything they wanted to be. And I got to ask you, guys, is there somebody in your life that's everything you want to be? Or at least most of the things you want to be that you look at and you say, I think I could be that. I don't know how to do it. Are you exposing yourself to someone who has the things you don't have, who has the qualities you want? It's exactly what happened for a bunch of fishermen and tax collectors and zealots when they exposed themselves to Jesus. And then after he's gone and they're on trial, here's the observation of the court. It's obvious these men have been with Jesus. For you and me, we need to be with Jesus, but we also need a mentor. We need somebody in our life that has the right to say. There had to be times David told these knuckleheads, pipe down. We're doing this. We see some of them with Jesus. He tells Peter several times, are you done yet talking? Calls him Satan at one point, says, get behind me. Tells him, you're going to deny me. Tells him at another time, Satan has desired to sift you like wheat, and I'm going to let him, but I'm going to pray for you. We need to be committed to a cause. We also need to be committed. There needs to be someone in our life that has the right to mentor us. And let me flip that. These mighty men all became leaders of groups. They became leaders of battalions. They became mentors too. You become a mentor by having a mentor, first of all, but then you have a burden on yourself. You have a responsibility to pay that forward, to hand that to the next generation, to raise up a generation. In fact, David says in Psalm 71, I believe it is, where he says, he basically says to God, I was young once and I'm old now, but let me live long enough to tell the next generation about you. I don't want to die yet because there's still another generation that hadn't heard about your great exploits. That's what a mentor does. A mentor says, I know how you feel. I was in that exact situation. I didn't have the answer, but God did. But God intervened. But when it seemed like I was way past the but God stage and I was way too far gone, when Lazarus had been in the tomb 3 days, God was still working. I was giving up, but God was still working. And then the third characteristic, commitment to God. I mean, that may seem obvious. Let me go back to that First Chronicles. The following were the chiefs of David's warriors who together with all Israel strongly supported him in his reign to make him king. Listen to the last phrase. According to the Lord's word about Israel. In other words, these guys didn't know David. And there was another king and they were putting their life on the line for a guy they didn't know. No, they're putting their life on the line because God had said he'll be king. He should be king. So they wanted to make David king, not because David was a swell guy. He probably was. But whether he was or wasn't, that wasn't at issue. What was issue was according to the word of the Lord. God had said, I'm going to raise up a new king, a man after my own heart, my king. And these men said, well, then we're going to do that because we're committed to the word of the Lord. We're committed to God. And we see that also in Jesus. We see he's committed to a cause. We see he's committed to a mentor. In fact, he said in John 12, I don't speak on my own authority. The Father who sent me has commanded me what to say and how to say it. Now, if he submitted himself to a mentor and said, I don't go out there and just make stuff up on my own. I don't just run off on my own path. I only do what my Father says do. I only say what my Father says say. Then we too need a mentor. But also, Jesus in Gethsemane comes to the moment, the most difficult moment of his life, and we see his commitment is to God and God's purpose, not to himself. Matthew 26:39, he went on a little further, bowed his face to the ground, and said, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Yet, I want your will to be done, not mine. You want to be a mighty man? Commit all out to your faith, to your family, to your friends, to your freedom, breaking anything that holds you captive, and to your future, not letting anything destroy your future or your family's future. Stand there. It's a reason our dads say some of that stuff opposite of what's in that video, and it's because they are guardians of our future. Be a guardian of your own future and being a guardian of your children's future, your friend's future, your family's future. And I'm going to close with one last scripture. Because this all happens not because you are that strong, that good, but because God's Spirit lives in you. Luke 4 verse 18 says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me. Jesus quoted this in his own home synagogue. Because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set free the oppressed. It's the Spirit of God in you that makes you able to take a stand. So it starts there. And I got to ask you this morning, if you bow your heads for just a moment, is the Spirit of God in you? If it is, He didn't come just because He thought you needed a roommate. He came because He has anointed you for freedom. He has anointed you to preach the good news to the poor. He's anointed you to be the priest of your family. Whether you're a father, whether you're a mother, He's anointed you to lead. He's anointed you to have a future that He has already ordained for you. The Bible tells us the steps of a good man are ordered. He hasn't come that you would live your life in bondage. In fact, His Spirit breaks the yoke of bondage. So I'm going to say a prayer and then we're going to do one last song. But I want to pray for you first. Heavenly Father, we look at ourselves in a mirror and we don't see mighty men or mighty women very much, often. But these men wouldn't have seen that either. The Gideons of the world, the little red-headed runt in the sheep field named David, they didn't see mighty men in themselves. But you did. And you've created each of us to be mighty. Lord, I pray that we will decide what things in our life are not negotiable, what things in our life we are willing to face no matter what the cost, no matter how long it takes, no matter what the risk, and no matter how long the odds, we will stand. And Lord, I pray you would give us that kind of conviction, because mighty men are made by conviction and commitment. And Lord, help us this morning, first of all, to commit our hearts and our lives to you. And while your head's still bowed, if there's someone here that maybe you don't have a relationship with Jesus yet, there's a mighty man or woman inside of you dying to get out. And it's as simple as this. The Bible tells us if we confess our sins, He's faithful and just to forgive us and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. We all have got plenty to confess. If you don't know Him today, you're not alone. Every one of us could spend the rest of the day. That's not what He wants. He's not looking for shame and condemnation. He's simply looking for the acknowledgement that says, I can never live up to the standard of perfection, but you did. Therefore, I want to accept your free gift of salvation. Forgive me, save me. I want to be part of the family. I want to have a good, good Father, like they sang about earlier. And I want to be that for someone else. And you can say it in your own way. Just simply say, Lord, forgive me. I turn my future over to you, and I declare you as Lord of my life.